Cheringham, Episode 21, Murder Most Wild. Written by Matthew Costello and Neil Richards. Narrated by Neil Dudgeon.
Chapter 1. Small Town Politics. Sarah pushed her way through the crowd towards the village hall, Chloe trailing a few feet behind. Chloe was 15 and going through a stage where Sarah hardly even saw her, let alone understood what she was thinking half the time, which made it even more surprising that both of them were now out together walking to the village hall in the middle of a very cold winter's evening in Cheringham. But these were dramatic times in the village, and, incredibly, Sarah and Chloe were united in a cause. She looked ahead and saw so many people streaming into the hall. "Wow, looks like the whole village is turning out," said Sarah. "They should. This is really important," Chloe said. Such a fierce warrior, Sarah thought, her love for her daughter now mixed with a strong dollop of admiration. The way ahead seemed completely blocked by a wall of bodies. She looked around for a better route to the village hall. Perhaps if they went down the pavement to the Civil War Memorial, then came back up to the main entrance by her office. Who would have thought that a meeting of the Cheringham Parish Council could cause such a fuss? She and Chloe had walked up together from home and come through one of the alleyways onto the village square just by the old stocks. Usually on a Friday night in winter, with the shops shut and no tourists in town, this area would be totally empty. Just tumbleweed blowing, as Jack would say. Whatever tumbleweed was. But tonight, with the big meeting only half an hour away, the place was packed. Hundreds of people stood between them and the village hall, holding up banners, shouting, chanting, "Developers out! Developers out! 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 Out!" Sarah had never seen such a cross-section of village life. Families, workers, old and young, all united in one cause. She felt a thrill of excitement at the sight. "Isn't this amazing?" she said to Chloe, who now stood at her side. "Awesome," said Chloe. Sarah peered at her daughter in the dark. Was she being sarcastic? Kids could be so cynical these days. But no, Chloe's face was lit up, her eyes bright. "Mum, it's just so cool that everyone's come out tonight, that they actually care." "Politics in action, love," said Sarah. "Come on, I think I've worked out a way to get through." Taking Chloe's arm, she headed off down the high street, round the back of the hall where the crowd was thinner. It was a slow journey. She felt as if she knew everyone, people shaking hands, high-fiving, slapping on backs, raising fists in the air, shouting, singing. A near-party atmosphere. Banners of all kinds were flying, lots of homemade signs, but Sarah could also see plenty of bigger, generic flags and placards from a whole range of green, environmentalist causes. There seemed to be a lot of strangers. Some banners even had London addresses on them. But there were plenty of familiar faces in the crowd. There was Grace from work, Pete Bull, her plumber, the vicar, Pravir, her father's friend, Hope Brown, the Butterworths. She even wondered if Jack might be here. But he'd been pretty adamant. "Right there with you in the cause, Sarah, but I've done my time on protests, on both sides of the lines." Well, he was missing something here. She'd never known the people of Cheringham to be so up in arms and united. And not surprising. The idea of a massive supermarket being built right on the edge of the village, on the site of the old lost village of Ingleston, was just completely crazy. The planning application from the enormous Zacro Corporation was coming up tonight for debate at the parish council meeting, and the village had turned out in force to register its horror at the prospect. Unanimous, it seemed. But when Sarah turned the corner of the village hall, she realised she'd been completely wrong about that, because there, ahead of them, was a counter-demonstration, a smaller crowd, but one that was just as vocal as the protesters. In front of them she could see Alan Rivers, the local cop, doing his best to keep the two sides apart with portable barriers and traffic cones. But he was clearly going to need reinforcements as the night wore on. Sarah sensed that the mood on this side of the hall was darker. Here, too, she could see faces she recognised, but there was an intensity and energy to this crowd that felt threatening. There were no green banners, no printed logos, just hand-painted slogans. Jobs for locals, stop rip-off prices, real people need a fair deal. "Come on, love," said Sarah, now worried, and seeing the gap between the two sides as a way through to the hall. "Let's get inside." "Alan, we've got seats saved for us," she called. She saw Alan pull open the barrier and beckon. "Quick now," he shouted above the din of the chanting, Alan's voice tense, his eyes darting all around. Something like this, all new to him. She grabbed Chloe's hand and pulled her past Cheringham's lone policeman. "You watch out tonight, Sarah," he said as he pulled the barrier closed behind them. "And you," said Sarah. "Surely you're not on your own?" "Got a couple of vans coming from Oxford," he said, "and not before time. Now go on, get in there." Sarah nodded and headed for the village hall entrance, where she could see two of the parish councillors standing unofficial guard. "Tony Standish has some seats for us," she said. The name of her friend, the local solicitor and parish clerk, worked the usual wonders, and the doors opened. Inside, she caught her breath and watched as the doors closed. It was quiet in here, her footsteps echoing on the marble floor. She looked at her daughter. Chloe's face looked flushed, but now with anxiety as much as excitement. Outside, something Chloe had never seen before either. "I don't get it, Mum," said Chloe. "I thought everybody wanted the same thing." "So did I," said Sarah. "I should have listened to my own advice, huh? Well, crowds can be unpredictable." "Exactly. Come on, let's find our seats." And she headed up the grand stairs of the Victorian Village Hall to the theatre space that once a month became the focus of village democracy during the regular meeting of Cheringham Parish Council. Sarah had been to these meetings before in her role as editor of the village online newsletter. Most months they were predictable and predictably boring. A list of low-level issues to be endured, reports from subcommittees, plans for next year's carnival. 2 long hours to be suffered through with barely a voice raised. But tonight she had a feeling things were remuneration, of course, but a worthy cause, and part of our long-term aim to make Cheringham's roads safe for all. Sarah watched Arthur Bassett remove his glasses, fold his notes, and sit down. By day, Arthur was a funeral director. Once a month he was transformed into chair of Cheringham's Transport Subcommittee. "Thank you, Mr. Bassett," said Ken Wickingham, owner of the newspaper shop on the High Street and this year's chairman. "Next item on the agenda, correspondence and the clerk's report." Sarah sat back in the gallery of the hall and ticked off transport on the agenda that had been handed to her when she and Chloe took their seats. That had been an hour ago, and they were still only halfway through the agenda items. She looked around. The gallery area was packed, as was the main body of the hall. The members of the council sat at a long table that had been set up in front of the stage, each of them behind a microphone. Amongst them, apart from Arthur and Ken, she recognised Adrian Sloane, who ran one of the biggest building companies in the area, and Tony Standish, who had been parish clerk for some years. Most of the others she knew as familiar faces from the shops or school events or Huffington's tea rooms. A while back, she'd known most of the parish council personally, but there'd been rather a scandal over a twinning exercise with a French town, and afterwards nearly all of the council had resigned. She and Jack had been responsible for bringing 1 or 2 councillors to justice, one of their early cases. She turned to Chloe next to her. Poor kid must be getting so bored. Don't worry, Chloe, she whispered. This stuff will be over soon and we'll get on to the supermarket. Are you kidding, Mum? Said Chloe, leaning close. This is amazing. I never knew all these things got decided here. Sarah smiled in surprise, and once again thought how little she knew her daughter, who was growing up so fast. As the chairman talked through the month's correspondence, Sarah drifted off into a reverie of recalled family moments, holidays with both her kids, school sports days, barbecues. Then a ripple of applause and a couple of shouts from the gallery. She tuned back in to the chairman, who leaned into the microphone. Which brings us to the only item on the planning agenda this month, the application by Zacro Corporation to build a retail development on 5-acre field, comprising a sales area of 40,000 square feet and associated landscaping, roadways, and further affiliated developments, including social housing. As the chairman spoke, Sarah saw an impeccably dressed woman step forward from the front row and walk over to a lectern that stood at the side of the councillor's table. She carried a laptop and a folder which, even from here, Sarah could see had the famous Zacro logo. Now, we have with us tonight Ms. Eva Weiss, who has come here from the Zacro head office to talk through the application with the council, and I'm sure at the end of the meeting she will be available for comments and questions. There was a bubble of chatter from the audience and 1 or 2 indistinct comments, which Sarah could tell weren't complimentary. Sarah watched the Zacro representative wait at the lectern until the room fell silent again. The woman had a groomed look that Sarah knew took a lot of time and money to perfect. Classic Brussels politico chic, she thought. Spend €1,000 on the outfit, but make sure the brand is anonymous. Eva Weiss opened her folder and stared calmly at the room. Mr. Chairman, councillors, thank you. And people of Cheringham, thank you for the warm welcome you have extended to me. You ain't seen half of it, came a voice from the crowd, and Sarah saw a ripple of laughter run around the hall. Eva Weiss smiled and waited for silence again, then began to speak. The Zacro Corporation owns and runs over 10,000 supermarkets across the European mainland. We offer consumers consistently low prices, and we promise our workforce a regular wage that usually exceeds local hourly rates. Our building construction is low impact, and we comply with all social directives in our target locations. Someone from the back snorted, "Target location, that what we are?" The Zacro rep paused again. One cool customer. The new exciting Cheringham Superstore will be no different. It will revolutionize the Cotswold retail experience. And now I will show you some slides, please. Sarah watched as Eva stepped away from the lectern and a young man with a laptop at the hall's media desk, presumably her assistant, lowered the lights and started a slideshow. God, not a PowerPoint presentation, whispered Chloe next to her. This is like being at school. Devil's in the detail, said Sarah. I think we ought to have a record of this. And she took out her phone and started to film the presentation. Slowly, Eva took the audience through the project, various slides showing maps and overhead photos, the land by the river that would be purchased, the new roads that would be built, the social housing that Zacro would donate gratis to the village, the jobs that would be created, the benefits, the savings, the limited environmental impacts. Mum, that woman makes it sound like they're a charity come to help us, said Chloe under her breath. That's why the arguments against it need to be made properly, said Sarah. They're putting a lot on the table. You don't think they'll do all that social stuff? Sarah shrugged but carried on filming. In truth, though, she didn't have much confidence in the ragtag army she'd seen outside to be able to fend off